Hey everybody, we're going to start out today with, I guess, a kind of game. It's called Love Quotes. And what I'm going to do is read a quote from a famous movie, and you are going to shout out the answers. And if you are watching this on video, then I am going to check in with your site pastor to find out if you actually shouted back at me. So don't be shy. Here we go. The first quote is this. I came here tonight because when you realize you want to spend the rest of your life with somebody, you want the rest of your life to start as soon as possible. What movie is it from? Of course, it is from When Harry Met Sally. Let's try another one. You want the moon? Just say the word. I'll throw a lasso around it and pull it down. Anybody know? It's from It's a Wonderful Life. Okay, how about this one? It was a million tiny little things that, when you added them all up, they meant we were supposed to be together. And I knew it. I knew it the very first time I touched her. It was like coming home, only to no home I'd ever known. I was just taking her hand to help her out of a car, and I knew. It was like magic. Anybody get that one? It's from Sleepless in Seattle. Okay, one more. Here it goes. Medicine, law, business, engineering. These are noble pursuits and necessary to sustain life. But poetry, beauty, romance, love, these are what we stay alive for. Did anybody get that one? It is from the Dead Poets Society. Okay, I hope you got at least some of those, and if not, maybe it's time to re-up your rom-com viewing list. But when we talk about love, so often, this is the kind of love that we're talking about. We say things like, I'm falling in love, or maybe I'm falling out of love. We might say, I'm head over heels, or I have butterflies in my stomach. We might say it was love at first sight, or that love is blind. Have you ever noticed that many of the sayings about romantic love kind of have this contradictory nature? And for some reason, it's the kind of love that we hear and see most. And while romantic love can be great, it is not the all-important kind of love that so many of us want it to be. And that's because it just doesn't give us everything that we actually need. There are probably a lot of reasons for this, but the two that I've thought about are, first, that the weight of expectation that we put on this kind of love is just too much. When we want one person to fulfill all of our wants and needs, we are bound to be disappointed. The expectations of high emotion are just not sustainable for a day in, day out kind of life. And the other reason that I thought of is that it is so easy to see love portrayed in movies and in TV as a kind of thing that is primarily to benefit us, to benefit me, to benefit you as an individual. This kind of love is often about feeling good. It's about being told what we want to hear. Love, as it's often portrayed in TV and movies, it means that we don't have to be asked to do something that we don't want to do. We don't have to do things that make us feel uncomfortable or anything that requires effort on my part. And so often we see it portrayed that if the person who we are with asks us to do something that we are offended by, well, then it isn't really love. In some ways, romantic love in our world today feels maybe disposable. Not always, not all the time, not in every circumstance, but sometimes. This is how love is experienced often in today's world, but it isn't the kind of love that Jesus majored on. But Jesus thought that the idea of love was incredibly, incredibly important. When he was asked by experts in the law what the greatest commandment was, Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest command. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All of the law and the prophets rest on these two commandments." Love the Lord your God. That's the first part of this greatest commandment. And the requirement of loving the Lord your God is to do it with everything that you have, your heart and your soul and your mind. This is not a choose your own adventure kind of command. It was an all-in kind of commitment. And when we are experiencing something that we are all in on, we give it our all. And inevitably, when we give something our all, it changes us. It changes how we think and feel and experience that thing. And in this case, the greatest command means that we love God and we love all of the things that he loves. And that includes ourselves, the world, and our neighbors. Which brings us to the second part, loving our neighbors as ourselves. This means that we should treat others the way that we would want to be treated. And the thought here is that we want to be treated well, and so we should extend that kindness, that graciousness to others, to everyone that we encounter. And what's remarkable about these two ideas is that this third point, all the law and the prophets hang on these. All of the law and all of the prophets hang on love. Everything that made this ancient society tick, their families and their places of faith, yes, but also their businesses and the way that they governed were based on love. Or at least they were supposed to be. And that has to make you think. Love must be a pretty important thing. But if that's so obvious, then why are we bringing it up this Lenten season? Well, it's because of this. If we believe that the cross had an impact on the world, if we believe that it is an action of love as well as of forgiveness and restoration, then we may want to look at the cross a little bit more closely. We may not want to take it for granted that love is indeed there. As we've already talked about, love can have beautiful, positive, warm, lovely feelings attached to it. But love can also be painful. And I'm not talking about a broken heart. That's love when it's been taken away. That, of course, is painful, but love itself can hurt. Like when somebody dies, or when they become incredibly sick and they change into a person that doesn't look a lot like the person who we loved before. In cases like these, grief is not self-pity. It's a feeling of real loss and deep pain. Grief is love shown in a very raw and painful form. It shows that love is enduring even after the one who we love has been taken away from us. The love changes, and it becomes a reminder of what we once had. In this way, grief is a very real part of love. And we see this from Jesus. In the very shortest verse of the Bible, it doesn't take more than 2 words to express the depth of what Jesus was feeling for his friend Lazarus, who had died. John 11:35 says, Jesus wept. And even those who stood against him, those who stood against Jesus, knew that grief and love can go hand in hand. Because the very next verse says this. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him. See how Jesus loved Lazarus." And so if you are experiencing grief, then the chances are that you are experiencing love. Now, correction is another part of love that we don't always want to mention. I was with a friend and their daughter was acting out. Now, this is not an uncommon thing for little kids, but this little girl just did not want to listen to the rules that were being given to her. And in this case anyway, there was a real danger to her safety. And so we weren't able to continue on with the activity that we had planned for that day. Out of love for this little girl came consequences. And I have to tell you, they were not very well received by this little girl. But love involves correction, and it can involve consequences. Love doesn't just feel good. It's not only love when it's easy and simple. In the same way that we love our littles by giving them consequences, by correcting them when needed, we need to choose to be loving towards people even when they are acting badly. Even when we're dealing with an irritating person. Even when we're dealing with somebody who it feels impossible to love. We can still choose to love them, even when it's not easy. And we see this from Jesus. We see it in the way that he corrects his beloved disciples with tenderness and with patience. When they do something that's a little off base, he doesn't just yell at them. He doesn't ignore them. Instead, he asks a question. Jesus asks a lot of questions. And one time that I think of is when James and John were jostling for power, and Jesus asked them, "Do you really want this?" But he doesn't just ask questions. He offers concrete examples of what to do and how to change. I think of Martha when she was bustling around and trying to do things, and Jesus said to her, "Hey, do you think there's something else that you could do? Maybe come sit with me." I even think of the poor woman who came to the temple and offered just a few coins for the offering box. And Jesus said to his disciples, "Look there, that woman, she has given more than everybody else because she gave everything she had out of her poverty. She didn't have much, but she gave it all." Jesus was so good at giving concrete examples of what to do and how to correct others who he was in relationship with. Jesus also corrected people by reminding them that their aim was not towards other people. Other people weren't the goal, but instead they needed to be aiming and directing themselves towards him. I think about the time when he had to redirect Peter, who was a little bit jealous of John, by kind of saying to him, "So what? It doesn't matter what John's doing. You're not following him. You're following me." In all of these things, we can see that Jesus never shied away from correcting those that he loved. If you have ever been corrected, or if you ever have needed to correct someone, then the chances are you were experiencing love. Now, the third thing that I want to mention is having compassion. Having compassion for someone when it is completely undeserved or not easy to give is the third way that Jesus actually redefines love for us. We all love that is lighthearted and touchy-feely and fun. Yet we kind of try to retreat or run away from real love. Because real love isn't about taking things for itself. It's actually about giving. Real love looks at the needs of another and it holds them as higher than its own. And it tries to meet that need first. Real love is selfless. It's not concerned with cost or with effort. And in order for us to show compassion to someone, we first need to know what their needs actually are. Now, if this is for somebody who you're already in a relationship with, then you can do this. You can figure out what their needs are by asking great questions or even just observing. But when it comes to someone or a group of people that we know less about, it may mean that we need to educate ourselves a little bit. We might need to learn about their needs and their circumstances, especially those that are different from our own. I'm thinking about those who are part of another generation, those who maybe are part of a different nationality or another ethnic group or a different socioeconomic class. And when we do these things, when we ask questions and observe and educate ourselves, those actions lead us to empathy, to understanding and what it's like for the other person. But in order to get to compassion, we then need to do what we can to lighten the burden that we have discovered. One of the most compassionate acts that I have ever received came from a friend who committed to having dinner with me every single Thursday for a year. My dad died just a couple years ago, and they didn't want me to be alone. And so for 52 weeks straight, they booked that time off, and they refused to book anything else into it. They gave me a safe place to talk about my dad, and they made sure that I never, not even once, felt that I was alone in that suffering. We see this level of compassion in Jesus' decision to come to earth to be with us. After all, compassion means to suffer with. And by becoming human, Jesus experienced suffering. The human experience is difficult. And perhaps the most obvious place where we can see Jesus' compassion is in the story of the cross. While he is up on the cross, Jesus suffered. But we know that he wasn't thinking of himself in that moment. Because what he says isn't, "Oh, woe is me, I'm in excruciating pain, why is this happening to me?" What he says is, "Forgive them, Father, for they don't know what they are doing." Jesus was thinking about us. And so when he suffered with us as a human and for us on the cross, he was suffering and showing compassion to you and to me. And so whether or not you realize it, you are the recipient of compassion, which means that you are experiencing love. Now, we've been through a lot over the last few minutes, maybe a little bit longer than a few minutes, and I want to give you some time to digest. And so we're going to take a few minutes to think about what it would look like for you to love like this. I want you to choose one of these ideas that we just went over: sitting in grief, giving correction, receiving correction, or offering compassion. And as you sit here in silence thinking about these, I want to encourage you to ask the Holy Spirit to show you where you're not seeing the opportunity to give or receive love in one of these ways. hope that time was fruitful for you. But now I want us to go back. I want us to go back to the greatest commandment. Because right before he died on the cross, Jesus revisited it. Do you remember what the greatest commandment was? It was love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself. Do you remember how important, how significant this was? Even the most important people who were a part of the legal system couldn't find fault with Jesus' answer. But if you remember how important it is, then it might surprise you to learn that what Jesus does is change it. You have to admit that's a pretty bold thing to do, considering how important the greatest commandment actually is. But Jesus goes ahead and changes it. And he says this: "A new command I give to you. Love one another as I have loved you. So you must love one another." Jesus looked at us and he said, "You deserve more." He said, "You deserve better." He said, "You don't always love yourselves very well. And so I want to change the standard." He says, "Love each other the way that I loved you, in grief, and through correction and consequences, and with compassion. Love each other the way that I loved you." But Jesus didn't just stop with changing the greatest commandment. He actually upped the ante even further by showing his love to us through sacrifice. He changed the greatest commandment, and then he went to the cross. And there he showed us his immeasurable love. And he did it by taking on all of that punishment and all of that pain, by becoming the sacrifice that would allow us freedom and forgiveness from all that we had done wrong, all that we ever would do wrong. And he did it not only so that we could become in right relationship with God the Father, but so that God the Father could be in right relationship with us. Jesus' sacrifice, his love, it was so big that it bridged the divide between us and the Father. This is a big, engrossing, all-encompassing kind of love, and it is not one that we have to be afraid of. It's not one that we should shy away from. Just because it's not easy doesn't mean that it's not real. And actually, this kind of love, the kind of love that Jesus has, that he's offering to you, that he is longing for you to receive, is the kind of love that meets all of our needs. Now, it's important to say that Jesus didn't just model this kind of love. He didn't just offer himself as an example of what it could be like. He actually invited us to participate in it. Now, we can't sacrifice ourselves for everybody's sins, but what we can do, how we can participate in this, is by loving others well. And so I want to offer just a few concrete ideas for you to take away as we finish up our talk about love. Well, first off, Jesus asks us to get to know him better. And we can do that in a bunch of different ways. Through prayer, through reading our Bible, coming to church, and by serving others. When we do that, we actually get to love each other better. As we get to know Jesus, we get to love each other better than we have in the past. Another way that Jesus invites us to do this is through the power of the Holy Spirit. The Spirit of God lives within each one of us. And if we pay attention especially in those moments where it doesn't really seem like love is present, we may just be able to seize an opportunity to love someone the way that Jesus did while he was alive. And it is in this pausing that I want to encourage you. When you find yourself in a situation where you feel irritated or frustrated, angry, or maybe just even a little bit at a loss, I want to invite you to stay in that moment. Don't rush away from the difficult feeling. Instead, stay in the moment and pray. Ask the Spirit to speak. Maybe you can refer back to the reflection time that we had in this service today. And then we can choose to act instead of to react. When we take the time to pause and to listen to the Spirit, we get to choose our response. I'll also say that the Spirit shows up through the gifts of the church. When we think about things like hospitality, mercy, and compassion, we get to see them here in the body. When somebody comes over to sit with you or asks you how your day is, well, that could be the Spirit motivating them, speaking to them to come and be with you. And when you do it for somebody else, it might be the Spirit encouraging you to go meet them where they are. But if you want something even more practical, that's right, we're not quite done yet. If you want something even more practical, then can I encourage you to just change your posture? When you're praying, when you're talking to the Spirit, if you usually sit, maybe try kneeling. If you're somebody who likes to walk while you're praying, try lying down. Or vice versa. It's amazing how a change of posture, something as simple as putting our body in a different position, can actually help us to hear from the Spirit of the Lord in new ways. Whatever action you choose, I want to pray this blessing over you. May you have the opportunity to love the way that Jesus did while he was alive here on earth, as he did on the cross, in the way that he continues to do after his 3 days in the grave and in his return to heaven. May you love like Jesus did every day until he returns. Amen.